Good evening, and welcome to Tales from Damar Keep. I am the narrator. Since the first noises uttered with understanding and the first symbols carved with meaning, stories have persisted through the ages, only to grow stronger as time passes, as ageless as time itself. A concept with great power to grow, to change, to solidify its place among culture, an ability to be the driving forces of love, deceit, and war. Like fine wine, over time stories become increasingly valuable, transforming into fables, legends, and myths. This world can be a tricky place to navigate, even in the best of times, where we feel like the rulers of our worlds. It only takes one support to be pulled, one push off the edge, to watch it all tumble down. You never know when the universe will attempt to correct itself, balancing the forces of order and chaos. Would you have enough wit to see it all unfold? Would you be aware of the game stacked against you? Well, listen as I tell this tale, and get a first-hand look into how even the mightiest of kingdoms can be felled by the unassuming. The Tengu Trickster, from the personal collections of bandy-about bedtime stories. Vafi Murder laughed. All of them, as a flock of Tengu are wont to do. It was not merely a chuckle, titter, nor snort, but a collective, derisive cackle. The sound defiantly clanged against the iron bars of the slave cage and echoed against the dungeon's stone walls. While dozens of creatures rested on the cavern floor with chains around their ankles, none dared to make any sounds, none except for the half-dozen crow-like creatures laughing uproariously from the large cage in the center of the room. "Shut up in there," yelled the Depel guard Alzez, as he walked into the cavernous room brandishing a whip. A few dozing collared goblins quickly arose and scooted back away from the slave master's stamping feet. Alzez stormed forwards to the cage, red eyes blazing with hatred. "You have been trying my patience since you were delivered today," yelled Alzez. "If this cage isn't enough, then we can try more creative ways to shut you up." This elicited more peals of laughter. What a day it had been. Vafi Murder laughed at the thing which happened to them that morning, and at the things which now lay ahead. Alzez glowered. This was going to be a tough assignment. The Tengu prisoners were brought in from an outpost near the border of the Depel Queendom earlier that evening. He had never tried to tame Tengu before, and cursed whoever's decision it was to bring them here. The decision was that of an outpost commander, Tara. Her ambition outstripped her wisdom by at least double, and she sought to catch the attention of the queen. The Depel Queen had recently expanded her reign to some topside territories as part of her insatiable hunger for power and resources. The queen spun her web of power with strong strands of deception and subterfuge. Her spies gathered incriminating intel on her friends and enemies alike, and she used that information to win uncontested favor with rulers across the land. She abused her influence to ever expand her reign into new lands, destroying natural resources, enslaving local communities, and building up an army of servants loyal out of fear. The Depel Queen's reign of terror seemed absolute, and Tara wanted to win her favor. Tara indiscriminately enslaved any and all she could in an effort to build the Queen's pool of free labor. Words of Tara's savagery spread quickly into the area, and few would be caught dead within the expanding Depel territory. Farmers and lords at the borders were willingly abandoning their lands or ceding their claims to the Depel rather than face the Queen's wrath. Tara, too, feared the Queen's wrath and was becoming desperate to capture new slaves. So it was a pleasant surprise when a Tengu was caught stealing from one of the Queen's gardens a large quantity of harvested gelegnite pods. Even better, the Tengu was found at night when the Depel had the advantage. The stupid bird probably thought the farm was run by the sweet family of Wildren that now sat in shackles in the Queen's alchemy lab, concocting all sorts of tinctures and explosives for the Queen's ever more powerful army. The Tengu, who called itself Vafi Murder, was brought into the outpost holding cell. Tara had heard the myths of the creatures known as Tengu. She knew that Tengu had a reputation for being tricksters of the forest. that they have inherited the cunning, intelligence, and mischievousness of their corvid kin. Some say that Tengu have a direct connection with deities of Iriath, and that they have a sacred duty to hold a dark mirror up to people, showing them where they have wandered off their sacred path. Others say that they cause chaos in the name of order, for they want no society to build up too much power. Others yet say they lack any moral compass at all, and they are driven by their individual greed and malice. Tara ignored these warnings, though, and she imagined the fame she would gain for capturing an ever-elusive Tengu. She smiled broadly at her captured quarry sitting alone in the jail cell. By the following evening, something peculiar had happened. 5 more Tengus somehow ended up in the cell. They cawed in unison, "To arrest one Vafi murder is to arrest all of Vafi murder. To arrest one Vafi murder is to arrest all of Vafi murder." The outpost guards couldn't say how or when the other Tengu arrived. Tara didn't question it further. The capture of 6 slaves would certainly bring her notice. What luck! By the end of the evening, the Tengu were transported to the slaves' quarters, and Alzev received orders to tame all 6. Alzev scanned the cage with resentment and then suspicion. "Wait," he yelled. "There are supposed to be 6 of you." "Yes, Vafi murder is 6, replied one of the Tengu. "I only count 5, Alzev bellowed. "Your eyes deceive you. Vafi murder is all here." The Tengu began to circle around the cage. "See?" "1 Vafi," said the first Tengu as they walked past the front of the cage. The shuffle of Tengu resembled a charlatan's game of Monte. "2 Vafi," said the second with added flaps and flair as they walked past the front of the cage. 3 Vafi, said the third. Alzez's head spun. The Tengu all looked and sounded the same. 4 Vafi, said another. But wasn't that the first one? 5 Vafi, said another. Alzez felt his temper build to the boiling point. This needed to end. He risked losing control not only of the Tengu, but of all the slaves witnessing this charade. 6 Vafi, said another. See, Vafi murder is, and was, always 6. What is this? Fumed Alzez. Now there are only 4 in the cage. I'm pulling you all out and stringing you along the wall. We'll see how many of you there are. Alzez reached for the keys on his hips that were no longer there. Vafi murder laughed, a cacophony of derision that drilled Alzez's hubristic failure deep into his soul. He looked down in disbelief. The keys were gone. How long had they been gone? He patted all his pockets and pouches in vain. He looked up into the cage again. Now, only 2 Tengu? How? Vafi murder laughed. The laughter came not just from the cage, but from all around. Loud, coarse, grinding. Alzev ground his teeth and pricked his ears. What was that? There was another familiar sound mixed in. Was that... Oh no, Alzez murmured. Barely audible over the Tengu's cackles was the tinkle of chains. He turned around and his blood turned to ice. Dozens of slaves were up and running for the exit. They had all been freed. A few Depel guards ran in to stop the exodus, but it was too few, too late. Alzez watched helplessly as the few guards were easily overcome, and the slaves all ran away. The blood drained from his already pale face, as Alzez realized that this error would cost him his life. The cackling behind him stopped. Alzez slowly turned around, and there in the cage were 6 silhouettes looming in the darkness. The Tengu's black eyes shone back at him like 12 obsidian mirrors. The silence was deafening. He could see reflected in their eyes his fear and shame, those feelings that had driven him to a life of service to a tyrant. Alzez became entranced by their silent gaze. His mind flashed back to when he joined the Depel Guard, because he wanted to bring peace and prosperity to his community, to make his family proud, and to protect the less fortunate from abusers of power. When the Queen took the throne, Alzez did not challenge her lies about the inevitability of Depel supremacy over others. He barely resisted when she decreed the domestic workers would be considered property. Out of fear of repercussions, he blindly followed orders without question. He used his skills to find escaped slaves and eventually earned the position of slave master. He became the very thing he had wanted to fight against. What had he done? Then, the 6 voices of Vafi Murder said in unison, "Run now, and you may yet live." Alzez was confused. Was that a threat? Then he felt it. A low rumble in the floor, and then a seismic boom knocked him off his feet. The alchemy lab. They didn't. That lab had held the largest stores of the Queen's explosives, enough to collapse and bury the cavern and the surrounding caverns where weapons and armor were stored. A wave of heat hit him as a wall of fire poured into the slaves' quarters. Looking back, the last thing Alzez would ever see was an empty cage. Would you have seen this coming? Would you ever consider yourself to be like Alzez? Were the Tengu right in their actions? Have you ever heard the tale of the Tengu Trickster? Tell us your version in the comments below.